On today's show, the status of Trae Young and the Hawks heading into the offseason, plus the latest on the front office search and more, and all that's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1962 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday here at the end of April. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox with no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. That includes Apple and Spotify. On the audio side, we are also on YouTube, so please like this video and share it with your friends and family if you are watching or listening to the show today. It's going to be a grab bag of sorts on today's episode. If you missed it, I did 5 episodes last week, including a 2-parter with my friend and ombudsman of this podcast, Tyler Jones, on Thursday evening into Friday, talking all things offseason, basically, for the Hawks. Landry Fields being ousted last week was, of course, a lead topic on that podcast, plus fallout and kind of setting the table for what's to come. But on this show, we'll be getting into a couple of newsy things, plus a mailbag question at the end of the podcast if we have time for it. But I want to lead with a popular topic and also one that's been written about a little bit and talked about a lot and I've been asked about this quite a bit in the last week since the Hawks were exiting the playoffs and postseason, and that is the status of Trae Young and the Hawks right now. So this has been a topic point that I've actually talked about for a long time now, months basically, as a potential pivot point for the Hawks and Trae, with one reason and one reason alone as the prominent reason because of that. And that is because he is extension eligible this summer. Now, that's not breaking news if you're a diehard fan of the Hawks by any means, but if he doesn't sign an extension this summer, it's kind of that natural pivot point in the league where a star player has 1 year of guaranteed team control after this. He has 1 year that's covered already, locked in, and then a player option he could, if he wants to, decline and hit free agency in about 14 months if there's no extension signed. So there's been plenty of examples of players who have been traded at this point in their contract if they don't want to sign an extension. Plenty of examples of guys who've signed extensions and everything in between. But broadly, if you're not covering the Hawks every day like I am nationally, it's like, oh, what about Trae Young? Is his status? I get that. It's a natural question. That's the backdrop of this. So also the Hawks have this new front office structure that's still undetermined right now with Ansi Salah at the top of it, but with the potential and likelihood to hire above him as the president of basketball operations. People ask me every single day, really every hour probably, about Trae Young, whether he'll sign an extension, whether the Hawks will trade him, whether they should trade him, all those questions. And I'll weigh with more of my thoughts in a second on the podcast, but there's been some notable reporting on Trae that I want to pass along over the last week or so. The first thing I actually did touch on briefly last week, but Chris Haynes went on Dan Patrick's show in the hours right after the Hawks fired Landry Fields and talked about how he has heard that Trae still wants to be in Atlanta, be part of the Hawks' future. And it wasn't like big breaking news from Haynes, but it was a relevant data point at that point in time. Then my favorite, Jake Fisher, who's been on this podcast before. He is writing with Mark Stein, also was previously at Yahoo, does a Bleacher Report stream, all these things. Jake did a stream actually a few days ago, and he said that his, quote, current read right now, end quote, is that we're not going to be hearing about Trae on the trade block. And that he said he actually has been pretty sure, he has not been this sure in a long time actually, that Trae is the centerpiece of the offense in Atlanta. He did not say definitively that the Hawks definitely would not trade Trae, but some pretty strong wording on the side of keeping Trae if you are to believe what Jake is reporting in that form. And then finally, Mark Stein and Jake co-wrote a piece on Sunday, which actually led to this segment being done now instead of tomorrow probably from me, and on their Substack. And I will quote some things here that were written by Mark and Jake. They noted the chatter around Trae has, quote, noticeably quieted down, end quote, and, quote, talk of potential young trades has undeniably faded, end quote. They did say, and this is obvious but still notable, that it is hard to pinpoint what the Hawks are doing right now because they don't have a front office structure. If the Hawks hire a president of basketball operations that does not like Trae Young, obviously that changes things. But that's not likely to happen, it doesn't seem like, but it certainly could. So I want to at least note and acknowledge that uncertainty that definitely still exists. But based on the reporting that's been out there, I'm passing that along right now. They also wrote about the stuff that I've been saying all season long, honestly, about how everyone in the Hawks organization has been talking up Trae's growth as a leader. I've heard the same thing and seen the same thing with my own eyes. His investment in guys like Dyson Daniels, Zachary Shishé, the general buy-in to what Quinn wants them to do. Better defense in the last couple of years. Obviously, he was leading league assist this year and kind of did a little bit less as a scorer, more as a facilitator by request of Quinn. And the end of the section did Mark and Jake by writing the following, quote, "The 26-year-old is well-positioned to remain at the forefront of Atlanta's offense," end quote. Now, that's obviously real reporting from 3 different reporters who have real sources. Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, and Chris Haynes are certainly like 3 of the top 5 or 6 NBA reporters that are out there nationally right now. And that leans in a direction that I am also hearing. So I am not those guys, but I, of course, cover the Hawks the most. And I hear a lot of things. And I think that this is all pointing to stuff that I have been hearing at the same time. So I wanted to say this right now. As of right now, I would be surprised if they move Trae this summer. Now, I've always kind of thought that, but it's gotten stronger as the last couple of weeks have gone on, which kind of goes away from what you might think with uncertainty in the front office. And I will certainly acknowledge that. There's been a lot of leaking, a lot of reporting, and then, of course, this stuff that I've just cited and what I've heard as well. Like, I think Trae's bought in. There's been no indication. Usually by now, after season's over, you might get a little bit of a buzz or something like that if a guy doesn't want to be here anymore. And that's just not been the case at all. Whether his public statements, social media-wise, or like behind-the-scenes leaks, like there's been none of the negative stuff that you might think a guy would be doing if he was trying to get out. That's important. Now, that could change. There's stuff that has to happen now. Like there's an extension negotiation. If that were to go poorly, that could change things, obviously. If he gets insulted about something or whatever, there's always a little bit of risk when it comes to that. Or if whoever they hire as president of basketball operations, like I said before. But it does seem like there's a lot less buzz overall about Trae even being available in trade than there was last summer. And look, I said this last summer a lot, but if you're a new listener, the Hawks were never anywhere close to trading Trae last summer, but they at least listened on him. Pre-DeJounte, like there really was we're going to probably trade one of these guys. And DeJounte was always more likely to be traded. I said that at the time. That, of course, ended up happening. But they did listen on Trae. That is definitely the case. Trae and DeJounte made more sense. They did that and then had a pretty, in my mind, encouraging season when you factor in all the stuff on the court what they actually had on the roster. And look, I agree with not trading Trae, honestly. I'm sure I'll get to this more with guests this summer or whatever in different forms and different fashions. And yes, there's, of course, challenges in building around Trae Young. Most teams would not pick a 6'1" guard to build around in a perfect world in the NBA. I agree with that. But it's not a perfect world. There are not like 25 guys perfectly to build around in the NBA. Like those guys don't exist. If there were, it'd be a lot easier and a lot harder at the same time. But Trae is one of the 10, 15 best players in the world offensively. Like if you want to think the defense, I definitely get that. You should. But he's proven to be a league average offense by himself, basically, and really better than that most of the time. And the ability to push that group up to the top levels if he actually has good personnel around him. And the big thing that I have said before, but I think a lot of people are missing nationally or even in fans or whatever right now, that is very, very important when you factor in the actual context around the Hawks, is that Atlanta's core group of players I'm really interested in. Really talented guys. Jalen Johnson, Zachary Shishé, Dyson Daniels, if you want to throw a Kongu in there as well. Those 4 guys plus Trae, but just those 4 guys. That group really, really needs a primary offensive engine. I'm not saying it's impossible that Jalen or Zach becomes a number 1 option. It's not impossible, but if you're asking me, will they become a number 1 option on a really, really good team? My answer to that is probably not. And I think if you just logically look at this, all 4 of those guys benefit from having a number 1 type of player to set them up and make their lives easier. Trae Young is that kind of player. I can definitely see people like zooming out and saying, look, the Hawks, you've seen their record the last couple of years or whatever, blaming Trae for that, and just thinking about broadly trading Trae and going even younger and rebuilding. I understand that thought process, but one, it ignores the context of who these guys are they have on the roster right now. Also, it ignores the Hawks don't have their own pick the next 2 years. So a traditional like all-in rebuild is not really doesn't make a ton of sense. And obviously, if you're Tony Ressler, you're not firing Landry Fields to go deeper into a rebuild. I would be shocked by that at this point in time. So all those factors in play, there's not really a way to, well, I shouldn't say there's not a way. It becomes unlikely to acquire someone better than Trae Young because you traded Trae Young. Like, what's the next move if you do that? You have to have someone who's going to be able to be an engine of your offense, and Trae is already that engine of your offense. So, again, That doesn't mean you don't trade him under any circumstances. Like, I think the situation is right now, as it gets older, there are contractual things. That's obviously real life. But I do believe firmly that Trae has more value to the Hawks than he would as a trade chip right now. And I think the entire ship the Hawks have built right now is built around him. And the guys that they brought in are really, really attractive young players. Two-way wing forwards plus a potential versatile shooter center who does a lot of things well. That's a really, really good nucleus, but you need the number one guy to make it all go. And Trae makes a lot of sense there. So they could build a very good team with what they have right now, including Trae. And that's what I would be going down. Unless, look, if there's a Godfather offer for Trae, I'm not saying you don't answer the phone. You have to. But I don't think that offer's out there for him. And I think, again, my combination of what I believe is their best path and the fact that I think he is worth more to the Hawks than he is as a trade piece, that means you keep him unless there's something that weird happens, basically. So between the report I just talked about, what I've already heard directly, and my analyst brain, what I think of Trae and the rest of this core, I think the best course is to keep him. But there are machinations we'll get into later on. I would say down the line, I'll have a mailbag question or something like that about his contract negotiations there and more depth on that. That's probably its own episode or own segment. And there is discussions there because the hope would be, broadly, as a little teaser for the future, that the Hawks can talk Trae into taking a little bit less, a la Jalen Brunson. That'd be the best path, I think, for the Hawks and Trae, really, to have Trae be like a guy who gets his jersey retired in Atlanta, another extension, et cetera, et cetera. But I get it if you're the Hawks. You don't want to pay him the most he can get. It's a lot of money for a guy who is small and getting a little bit older and older and older. So long story short, I think they're going to keep him. I think they should keep him. That's not firm, but between the reporting that's out there and what I think and what I've heard, I think Trae's going to stick around for at least a little while longer, and we'll get into all that and, of course, in more detail, different ways later on in the summer. Okay, in a second, I will get into a check-in on the basketball operations president search and the rumor mill there, and at the end of the podcast, a mailbag question that's actually related to Trae Young. We'll get into all that and more in just one moment. This is brought to you by PrizePicks. Basketball and hockey playoffs are here, and there's no better time to turn your sports knowledge into real cash with PrizePicks, the top destination for daily fantasy action. At PrizePicks, they make it simple. Pick more or pick less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. You can even actually mix and match players across basketball, hockey, baseball, and many more sports for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. I'm looking at the board in the NBA each and every day this week. Playoff action happening all the time. There's a lot to like, more, less, everything in between. And you also turn your playoff hot takes into tickets to a basketball championship series. Every lot of people you actually make on PrizePicks will enter you into the takes 2 tickets sweepstakes, which gets you in a +1, a VIP trip to the ship. The app makes it so easy as well. You can build a lineup in just 60 seconds or less. And with Taco Tuesday discounts and Flex Buyer promos, there's even more value each week. And when you win, you get paid fast. Sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. That's really, really fast to get paid when you win. Download the app today at PrizePicks and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at PrizePicks. That is code LOCKEDONNBA. $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, so the reporting on stuff other than Trae in the last few days has centered mostly on the president of basketball operations vacancy for the Hawks. That they, of course, kicked off that announcement a week ago by firing Landry Fields and opening up that search, in addition to promoting Antti Sala to the number 2 job with the team. I mentioned this before, but I've heard even more since last week that this is a real surprise in a lot of circles around the Hawks about Landry, who is a liked figure in that front office. There are people that were shocked by that decision, actively not happy about it, even people I've talked to around the team. That doesn't mean anything's crazy. By the way, if you missed it, I talked about this in depth last week on the show, all the different angles, and I won't really get that now, but that was definitely kept coming up in my calls over the weekend. The first thing that was reported last week was Elton Brand, who I did refer to last week, but who, of course, played with Kyle Korver, played under Quinn Snyder. Quinn was an assistant with the Hawks, was on the Hawks roster, an established name. All the reporting points to Tony Ressler, if they do hire a president, being someone they're looking for a bigger name, kind of senior level executive to kind of oversee the whole thing. That's a hard guy to get, but there was reporting from Mark Stein, who said something actually that Tony Ressler kind of wrote in his official statement. But Stein reported that Ressler is, quote, willing to pay the going rate for a top tier and experienced lead decision maker, end quote. Look, I've been critical of Ressler in the past and even as recently as last week. But I will say this, he has spent money on executives and like non-player like roster management money stuff. Like he has spent on the margins. He has, like for instance, Travis Schlenk was making like top 10 executive money after he got extended following the conference finals run, for example. They paid real money to get Antti Sala away from Golden State. They did build the practice facility in Brookhaven. Like they've spent some money outside of the just paying for players part of it. So I want to at least give him a little bit of flowers on that front. But that's interesting to kind of read that in reporting from Mark Stein. The question, of course, though, is who is that person going to be? So I mentioned Elton Brand's been out there. Bob Myers, the former Warriors executive, has been floated a little bit. He's doing TV right now for ESPN. But he has ties to Antti Sala, of course, from Golden State. He was, of course, worked with Travis Schlenk, I should say, back in Golden State before that. But people have also reported, I've heard the same thing, like some skepticism about Myers. Would he actually take the job in Atlanta? I would be surprised, basically, in what I've heard so far. There's some cold water in the Stein reporting about Myers even moving to the East Coast. He's kind of a West Coast guy, all of that stuff. Of course, money talks, but we'll see. Wolves executive Tim Conley could be a free agent this summer that Stein wrote about, but Minnesota is also probably going to pay him to stay after they change their ownership group. And they have a team that's probably going to be in the second round of the playoffs potentially pretty soon. I haven't read any other huge names. There was some reporting from John Hollinger about Grant Hill potentially wanting to do it, but Grant's doing TV plus USA Basketball. And if you didn't know this, Grant Hill already owns a very, very, very small piece of the Hawks. He was kind of billed as like a co-owner along with Tony Ressler when he bought the team almost a decade ago. But Grant's done basically nothing with the Hawks since then. He was kind of just a face of the group, essentially. But it was reported by John that like they'd like Grant Hill to do it, and Grant probably doesn't want to. I don't blame him for that. He's got a lot of different jobs. He's doing TV, USA Basketball stuff. Like I'm sure he doesn't need the money, all those things. But I wouldn't be terribly interested in that because Grant's not really done that at the NBA level. But that's kind of what's out there to some degree as well. So long story short, there isn't like a prominent lead candidate that's been reported out there. These things are difficult to kind of wade through because you don't know who's available, like where they're going to swing. Are you trying to get someone from another team that's already employed? Like if you try going through the league of like who guys to like at least call, yeah, but like it's harder to peg those guys if they're currently employed by a team. So a tough reporting situation. A little bit of a gear shift here, but staying in the front office realm. If you heard my emergency podcast last week about Landry Fields being fired, you wouldn't have been surprised by much that John Hollinger wrote in The Athletic last week. It was a lot of similar stuff to what I was saying in the past, which actually made me feel better because John is a smart guy. If you didn't know this, John Hollinger covers the league at large, but he lives in Atlanta, so he's around the Hawks a lot. And he kind of wrote The Athletic's piece about the situation on the whole, from Trae to Quinn to the front office, like the whole kind of lay of the land in Atlanta. I didn't agree with all of it, but it's a good piece, and it's certainly reasonably reported and written from John. Some notable stuff in there. He wrote, quote, "Though Fields was theoretically in charge, the number of competing organizational voices was cacophonous," end quote. So obviously that's a point I made a lot last week, but Fields was not on the firmest ground by league executive standards, and there's just a lot of voices in Atlanta, and there still are now. I pointed that a lot, listing the names off with Howard Jones later last week. Like you got owner, you got coach, everything in between, former agents, Chris Grants, like Kyle Korver, Antti Sala, et cetera, et cetera. But one line that got a lot of attention from John is that he wrote that Nick Ressler, of course, the son of Tony Ressler, quote, "has had significant input, and while his day-to-day involvement appeared to lessen this season, I am told he is still in the room on any important decision," end quote. So that's not a great thing if you're, at least from my point of view. If you missed this, there was a whole reporting cycle a couple years ago about Nick Ressler being a way too prominent voice in the DeJounte Murray trade. The Hawks kind of quietly changed his job title away from the front office, and they've kind of leaked out there to me and others that like Nick's not in the room anymore. It's all changed. Also, Nick was kind of tied to Landry Fields to some degree. That was kind of reported out there that Landry and Nick were not like a partnership, but like Nick was part of why Landry came to the organization. All these things, right? So in the meantime, Nick's title has changed to he's now the VP of Strategic Planning and alternate governor of the Hawks. Now, his dad is the governor, which is a word for owner, but like there's one the Hawks have an ownership group. Tony's the majority person, but there's one governor on every team. Tony's the governor. Nick is the alternate governor, which is notable because he's just Tony's son. But a VP and also chairman of the Atlanta Hawks Foundation. That's not a front office role, but according to what John reported and what I've also heard, Nick is still in the mix. And this is not a thing that it happens a lot in certain circles. Like obviously, son of the owner, like that comes with him with implied juice. But the Hawks already have a lot of names, a lot of people in the mix, and Nick's not really qualified to make basketball decisions. So that's just an interesting, and I would say not a good storyline if that is still the case right now. Just throwing it out there. Not good process overall, I would say. And again, Hollinger did pour cold water on the Grant Hill thing, but the Grant Hill thing was kind of out there as well. So that's kind of a nuts and bolts thing. I would read that piece. Again, I don't endorse all of it from John, but I think a lot of it was reasonably reported, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, I will get to something in just a second that actually answers a mailbag question about something that John wrote in that piece. A little bit of a tease for the next segment, but we'll get into all that and more coming up in just one moment. This is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel, they're giving us all new customers an incredible way to get on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet at FanDuel, you get $250. That's $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. They make betting so easy at FanDuel, whether it's picking your favorite teams or diving into all kinds of player props. They have offerings across the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads, money lines, game props, future bets, live betting, and so much more, from three-pointers to steals to assists. They have so many ways at FanDuel to bet your favorite player props as well. Plus, after the game tips off, you can actually combine your live prop bets together into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. And FanDuel also has every single sport and league that you can possibly think of. And of course, that's headlined by the NBA, of course, but they have college sports, they have MLB, NHL, UFC, boxing, golf, tennis, soccer, and everything in between. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com right now to claim your $250. And that's $250 in bonus bets today. All right, and we'll make this a Trae Young focused podcast. Already led with that, and we'll end with it as well. A question from Blake that I will go ahead and answer right now, and it is the following. Blake asks, what did you think of the Athletics' hypothetical of a trade with Trae for LaMelo or Ja? Now, I'm glad Blake used the word hypothetical, because often people will say rumor or whatever. This is not a rumor at all or anything close to that. John Hollinger, who I referenced before, kind of floated out just hypothetically, not anything reported, trading Trae, or at least thinking about trading Trae for LaMelo Ball or John Morant as a hypothetical. He wasn't advocating for it, saying it would happen, that it should happen or whatever, just part of the little kind of a throwaway thing. But I did see it, and my broad reaction was no thanks. Now, I'll get into that, but that's my broad reaction. I would at least understand if you disagree with that. I am not acting like I'm above everything else here, but there are always PR cycles about this. For a while, for instance, 3 or 4 years ago, the Hawks made conference finals. Trae was riding high. People were kind of in on the Trae Young experience. As I've said in the last year or two, I think Trae is now very clearly underrated nationally, which still surprises me. If you told 2019, 2020 version of me that Trae would be underrated, I'd be pretty surprised, because he was on track to not be, because he was, basically guys that have huge numbers, stats, usually get, if anything, overrated. And Trae's kind of going the opposite way. Anyway, I think he's underrated now. But John Morant got elevated in a lot of people's minds a few years ago, was in those top 10 player conversations that didn't really deserve to be there, in my opinion. And LaMelo is kind of a weird evaluation, because he's never been on a real team, honestly. But he was putting up massive numbers earlier this year, 30 points a game, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, there's kind of two angles to this. Number one is is Trae better than LaMelo or better than Ja? And number two, would you rather have Trae based on the situation overall, age, contract, what have they proven, all those things? So for number one, this is the one that I think is at least a little bit more controversial. I think Trae is better than Ja and better than LaMelo. And I always have thought that. So that maybe I'm wrong, but I do believe that. Now, I don't think it's massive, and people will disagree with me about this. But the big thing that people pick on with Trae is obviously his defense. A lot of that is reasonable. He's not a good defender. He's very limited. He's bad. He has improved, but he's still bad. That's fair to say. I think even in a moment of truth, people in the Hawks would admit that to you, and they have. But it's also overblown at times. You hear stuff about Trae being the worst defender in the history of the world. He's not that, because guards can only hurt you so much, number one. And also he's improved. He isn't in a different tier of bad than a lot of other guys, is what I would say. Here's the thing, though. John Morant and LaMelo Ball are bad defenders, bad. Are they better or worse than Trae? whatever your argument is, that's fine. I think particularly in Ja's case, because he's so athletic, people have always thought he's a good defender. He's not a good defender. He's actually quite bad. He has better tools than Trae, for sure, but I don't think he's much better. LaMelo has a lot more size, and there's always been a thought, including by me, back in the draft process with LaMelo in 2020, like the size for LaMelo and like the way he feels the game, like he should be good defensively, but he's really not. Like he's really quite bad. So anyway, if the main knock is Trae's defense, like you're not getting more of that from Ja LaMelo. That's just one thing. I tend to trust Trae to elevate an offense. Generally speaking, I think he's the best passer of the three. Maybe LaMelo's a better shooter, but Trae's definitely a better shooter than Ja. And all this, I won't go. It's not a half-hour interview answer here, but I will say I think Trae is better. The biggest thing, though, is what points me to that direction is the second part of this, which again is like the overall situation, age, etc. And while Trae is a little bit older, he actually plays basketball. And I say that with some snark, I understand that. But in 7 years in the league, Trae's averaged 69 games per season. And that includes a year that had 10 fewer games because of the pandemic and all those things. So he's really averaged about 70, 71-ish games per season over 7 years, if you prorate it. He's missed 9 games or fewer in 5 of his 7 NBA seasons and never missed more than 28 games in a season. And the only time he missed that many games was last year when he had a fluke injury, a weird fluke injury. He's very durable. In contrast, John Morant's played 59 games total the last 2 years combined and has never played more than 6-7 games a season. So Ja's never once reached what Trae averages in a season in games played. That matters if you are the number one guy on our roster. LaMelo Ball, in his last 3 seasons, he has played 36 games, 22 games, 47 games. Now, part of that is that they were trying to tank and rebuild. I get that. He's also been hurt. So, like, it is what it is. Now, I'm not saying that is definitely going to continue in the future. Trae's a small guy. Maybe he gets banged up a little bit more, but he was durable this year. For instance, even with an injury, he played through a lot of the season. And look, availability is important. Like, it just is when you're the best player on the team. And Trae has a big advantage in that category over both guys. So even if you thought those guys are better than him, which I don't agree with, but even if you think they are, they're not better by enough to take them over Trae, in my opinion, when you factor in durability and reliability, generally speaking. Yes, LaMelo's 3 years younger. That does matter, but he's literally accomplished nothing in the NBA as far as like being on a real team. A lot of that, just to be very fair to LaMelo, I don't pile on him. I don't think he's like this joke of a guy. Like, people have said some crazy thing about LaMelo that I don't think are his fault because he's not been in a good situation. Like, that's a terrible situation around him. That's not his fault. And he has a lot of talent, and I think LaMelo's good. I really do. But he hasn't been better than Trae at any point, I don't think. And you throw in like the total lack of success at all, like none. If you know, one of the knocks on Trae that I hear all the time is like, oh, the Hawks are just in the play-in every year. The Hornets would love to be in the play-in. Like they've been there once and they got waxed by the Hawks actually. So anyway, with Ja, obviously you could argue he's reached some heights that are as high or higher than Trae. Like, I don't know. I don't want to litigate that. It is what it is. That's fine to argue. He doesn't play though. Like, he doesn't, even this year when he was like kind of healthy, he just can't play more than 5 games in a row or whatever reason. You throw in the off-court stuff, which your mileage may vary, but obviously he's had some off-court challenges, suspensions, etc. You throw in the shooting questions. He's not a shooter. He can't really shoot. And then you throw in he's only 1 year younger than Trae. Like, they were in back-to-back classes. Like, he's not a lot younger than Trae. Like, I would much rather have Trae to be my franchise player than Ja Morant. Like, I might be wrong about that, but that's where I would be if you throw in everything. Availability. Trae's never had an issue of any kind off the court, like 0 issues. Like, yeah, he's sometimes like early in his career, there was some leadership questions. I get all that. He's obviously matured. He's bought in. And look, I'll take Trae. That's the answer to the question. This could be its own week of segments. I get it. I'm not going to do it all now. And that, again, like I said earlier, Trae is not perfect. He's a flawed player that you would not in a vacuum pick to build your team around because he is 6'1". 6'1", and slight and defensively challenged. I get all that. He isn't a top 10 player in the league, but he is really good. And somebody asked the question, and John wrote about it. Like, I would pretty easily, honestly, rather have Trae than LaMelo or Ja. maybe you can get me into a 5-year scenario with LaMelo because he is 3 years younger, where I might take LaMelo, but I probably still wouldn't. It'd be closer. And with Ja, like, he's got to play basketball. So anyway, long story short, hopefully that was coherent on some level. It's kind of a fly by seat my pants thing there. I wasn't planning on doing that. The question came in earlier today. Felt appropriate to answer the question. One little plug at the end of the podcast, if you made it this far. I actually already recorded this. It's a 2-part episode that I'll have later on this week with my friend Brian Schroeder about the NBA draft. We kind of just get a pretty broad, but also touch on a lot of different players. Look at the 2025 draft. Basically, almost every guy in the Hawks range between their potential 13th pick and 22. It's probably talked about 25 guys on that podcast. It's coming up later this week, so please stay tuned for that. And if you're wondering where the draft content is, it's coming. It's already been recorded. There's more and more coming up in the next 2 months, I promise you, on that front. So please subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Please subscribe there and tell your friends. Also, ratings, reviews, likes. Follow us on social media. We are on Twitter as a podcast at Locked On Hawks. I am there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky personally at BT Rowland. And then also you can follow my non-podcast work, some writing, extra audio stuff, etc. It is patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody. I appreciate you listening to the podcast. As always, we'll have many more podcasts coming up later on this week.